Imagine tomorrow, your name trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. That's exactly what would happen to a boy from a sleepy Anatolian village if he were caught in the Ottoman recruitment net. Most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. And yet, these boys, often as young as 10 or 12, are thrust into a world of luxury, terror, and rules that could make the strictest boarding school seem like a playground. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. While you do that, post your location and local time. I want to see who's awake for this kind of medieval mischief. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. The first step into this darkly fascinating world begins far from Istanbul, in the dusty streets of a provincial town where boys with nothing but their laughter and stubborn courage live. The recruiters, shadowy figures who blend folklore with bureaucracy, watch silently. Historians still argue whether these raids were entirely voluntary, a matter of poverty and desperation, or forced kidnappings under the guise of imperial duty. One moment, a boy is tossing stones into a river. The next, a carriage arrives, heavy with the promise of a new life, one that he cannot refuse. Families are offered gold or threatened with ruin, a classic carrot-and-stick game that modern child protection officers would have kittens over. Yet there's a strange, almost cinematic order to the chaos. Boys are collected in batches, names recorded with bureaucratic precision, and transported to the capital. Along the way, some are awed by the sheer scale of the empire. A cousin's farm seems to vanish beneath endless miles of road, forest, and the occasional wild animal. Rumors circulate about a crocodile kept in a private palace moat somewhere along the route, a creature with its own chambermaid and sunscreen regimen, according to fringe stories that even seasoned historians treat with a raised eyebrow. Upon arrival, the first sensory shock hits. The palace is a world where smell, sound, and light are all heightened, a dazzling assault on a child's memory of ordinary life. Marble corridors, echoing laughter, and the scent of exotic spices can inspire both awe and terror. Boys are stripped of former clothes, names, and in some cases, even childhood games, all folded neatly into the strict architecture of the harem. They are given new attire, bland and uniform, signaling that individuality is both unnecessary and dangerous. The guards, eunuchs themselves, walk among the newcomers with measured steps, teaching obedience with gestures rather than threats, though subtle menace is never absent. Here, the lines between privilege and imprisonment blur. Some boys find fascination in their new environment, silken cushions, servants attending their every whim. But even in these moments, fear is a constant companion. The palace feeds ambition as deftly as it feeds the body. Whispers of potential future glory mingle with the understanding that failure or disobedience can erase years of carefully constructed hope. Quirky tales circulate among new arrivals about secret passages lined with mirrors, where one could, theoretically, watch a sultan and his court without ever being seen. Historians still argue whether these passages ever existed or if they were invented by bored, imaginative boys longing for control in a world that offered none. At night, the boys lie awake, listening to the rhythm of the palace, the clink of keys, distant footsteps, and the occasional shriek that's never fully explained. They share stories of their homes, layering them with exaggeration, humor, and superstition to keep courage alive. A boy from the Black Sea claims he once wrestled a bear. Though everyone knows the story is nonsense, it's the way he says it, with such sincerity, that matters. The transition is subtle. Fear begins to mingle with fascination. Curiosity sparks in corners of the mind, and the first understanding of the palace's duality, the mingling of allure and horror, takes root. The selection process, hidden in shadow and whispered rumor, determines who will endure the next phase, the surgery that transforms boys into eunuchs. Only a handful of the newly arrived will reach it, chosen for physical traits, intelligence, and a subtle, almost unspoken measure of potential obedience. The rest will serve in lesser capacities, their ambitions clipped before they've fully formed. This first glimpse of destiny's cruel lottery leaves many of the boys in a quiet daze, caught between excitement and despair. And then the first whisper spreads. Not all boys leave the palace the same as when they arrived. Some disappear into rooms that promise education, power, and prestige. Others vanish in ways that even the bravest guard hesitates to describe. The rumor itself is enough to keep everyone alert, their young minds balancing between fantasy and stark, unnerving reality. It's the first taste of a life that is not entirely their own, a glimpse of a world where freedom is measured not by desire, but by usefulness, compliance, and the ability to endure, a future few could imagine, let alone survive. The palace, with its layers of beauty and menace, waits. Every boy who has passed through the outer gates carries with him a question that will define the rest of his life. What price will he pay to belong? And somewhere deep within, a chilling thought lingers. Some doors, once open, can never be closed, and the next stage of the journey is both inevitable and unspoken. The courtyard hums with the muted rhythm of activity, yet beneath the surface, tension coils like a hidden serpent. Castration, the dreaded next step, is more than a procedure. It is a complete transformation, a ritual that fuses fear, pain, and the odd glimmer of power. Imagine the sterile chamber. Walls washed in pale light, instruments lined like soldiers awaiting orders. The air carries the mingled scent of antiseptic and something more human, more immediate: anxiety, dread, and whispered prayers. Historians still argue whether the procedure was conducted solely by palace surgeons or whether specialized traveling experts were sometimes brought in for particularly high-profile recruits. Either way, the boys are told very little, their education in survival having begun long before any sharp tool touches them. The moment arrives with clinical precision. The eunuch surgeon, an older man whose hands are steady from decades of repetition, gestures the boy forward. The process is quick, yet shrouded in ritual. Robes are adjusted, assistants take positions, and the room quiets except for the soft murmur of instructions. What modern sensibilities recoil from an act that robs a boy of his biological future was, in the palace, seen as a gateway to a different kind of life. Fringe accounts tell of boys who supposedly survived the procedure without lasting injury, a feat that, if true, defies the harsh realities of 16th century medicine. The truth is, few survive unscathed in the psychological sense. Afterwards, the initial haze of shock mixes with the strange new attention from palace officials. Eunuchs quickly learn that their value skyrockets, not because they are safe companions for women, as common myth suggests, but because they occupy a rare social niche, men who can wield influence without threatening the sultan's domestic authority. The young boys, still disoriented, are dressed in new attire, often silks and muted colors, signaling that they have passed through an invisible gateway. The visual cue marks them as both privileged and vulnerable, and this duality will define their existence. A light joke spreads among newcomers. "We went in boys, we come out, mostly boys," eliciting nervous laughter that feels heavier than intended. Psychologically, the transformation begins immediately. Lessons in obedience, discretion, and the subtle arts of influence start the moment the boy can walk and speak without stumbling. Some are taught languages, others the mechanics of courtly etiquette, and a few are steeped in the obscure knowledge of palace intrigue, maps of alliances, codes of conduct, and the unspoken rules of loyalty and betrayal. Oddly enough, one fringe tale claims a eunuch once acted as an undercover messenger in the Sultan's private menagerie of exotic animals, delivering intelligence while dressed in a costume resembling a peacock. Scholars debate whether these stories were real or exaggerations meant to illustrate the wide-ranging responsibilities of palace servants. The physical reality of life post-castration cannot be understated. The boys are expected to endure rigorous training regimes, from memorizing complex palace schedules to mastering the art of subtle influence. They learn that small gestures, timing, and attentiveness can elevate them from mere servants to trusted advisors. A minor slip could cost them favor, yet even then, survival often favors the clever over the obedient. Humor, often dark and self-deprecating, becomes a coping mechanism. One boy joked about the palace baths being the only place my ego is smaller than my shadow, a remark that drew a mix of laughter and sympathetic nods from his peers. An unexpected side effect is the camaraderie that grows among those who have endured the procedure. Bonds form quickly, their shared trauma and secret knowledge creating a network of alliances and quiet loyalties. Some boys keep diaries, carved into small wooden boards or etched onto scraps of parchment, detailing lessons learned and moments of triumph. These records, often destroyed later, suggest that boys had a sense of narrative control over their own lives, a way to assert identity in a system designed to strip it away. Historians still argue whether these early writings influenced later palace policies, or if they were purely personal artifacts. Training also emphasizes perception and observation. Eunuchs are taught to notice nuances others overlook, a shift in the sultan's tone, a glance between powerful women, or the subtle change in a guard's posture. Quirky tidbits mention games designed to sharpen these senses, a kind of palace-level chess with moving pieces who don't realize they are being studied. The objective is clear. A eunuch who anticipates trouble or influence before it manifests becomes invaluable. Failure, in contrast, often results in reassignment to the less prestigious corners of service, a reminder that life in the harem is a careful balance of competence and timing. Through it all, the boys internalize a paradoxical reality. They are both powerless and potent. Castration removes a part of them, yet it simultaneously grants access to a sphere of influence inaccessible to unaltered men. Some even embrace their new identity with a grim determination, calculating long-term survival with precision. Yet the underlying fear never disappears. The shadow of the surgeon's chamber, the memory of whispered warnings, and the knowledge that their fates are inseparably tied to palace politics linger like a quiet drumbeat, punctuating every lesson and every laugh. And as the boys finish their initial training, newly aware of both limits and possibilities, a murmur begins to circulate, one that hints at rivalries, secrets, and dangers that no amount of preparation can fully anticipate. The next phase of their lives, where influence collides with intrigue, is about to begin, and the palace will reveal who can thrive and who will vanish quietly into history. Life inside the palace walls is a constant negotiation between visibility and invisibility, a delicate balancing act that could make any modern office politics look like a kindergarten squabble. The boys, now transformed into eunuchs, wake each morning to a schedule that is meticulously regimented. Ablutions, breakfast, lessons in courtly etiquette, language drills, and the subtle reading of human behavior. The corridors are alive with movement, whispers, and the occasional tinkle of distant laughter from chambers that will forever remain off-limits. Historians still argue whether the harem was primarily a domestic space or a political one disguised as domesticity. The answer, of course, is probably both. Within this maze of marble and silk, a hierarchy emerges that is invisible to outsiders but rigid in practice. Senior eunuchs wield authority, mentoring the younger ones while testing loyalty with tasks both trivial and consequential. One quirky tidbit: some boys were reportedly trained to memorize the exact scent profiles of the Sultan's favorite perfumes, a skill useful for discreetly identifying visitors or changes in the palace's daily routines. Such knowledge is minor in isolation, but, combined with observation and timing, transforms a seemingly powerless boy into someone indispensable. Daily routines mask a deeper rhythm, lessons in patience, discretion, and small rebellions cloaked as obedience. Boys are taught to notice the tiniest shifts in expression, a sharp glance, a barely audible sigh, and interpret them accurately. Quirky anecdotes describe games played in the corridors where missteps were quietly noted by senior eunuchs. The consequences were never immediately visible, which heightened both fear and strategy. Humor, always a lifeline, takes a clever form. One boy joked that he could map the palace blindfolded because every guard's yawn has a story. And somehow, he wasn't entirely wrong. Forbidden knowledge seeps in quietly. Eunuchs gain access to conversations, letters, and confidential instructions that others cannot see. They learn the subtle rules of influence, how a sultan might be persuaded or placated without overt pressure, and how whispers can steer decisions. These skills, while technical, also demand psychological acumen, patience, empathy, and cunning. Historians still argue whether the strategic training of eunuchs directly shaped Ottoman policy or if they merely amplified decisions already made by the Sultan and his viziers. Either way, the boys quickly learn that survival is not about brute force, but perception and subtle intervention. Friendships, alliances, and rivalries develop with a quiet intensity. Bonds between eunuchs are forged through shared secrets, experiences of pain, and mutual observation of the palace's inner workings. One boy's diary mentions a midnight duel of riddles, where failure meant a night of extra chores, a curious blend of play and pressure. The same diary notes that humor was often dark, a coping mechanism for lives where every action could ripple into either privilege or punishment. These small rebellions, almost invisible to outsiders, shape identity and teach early lessons in political survival. Social life in the harem is a careful choreography. The boys navigate rooms filled with women of power, advisors, and other servants whose intentions range from benign curiosity to subtle manipulation. They quickly realize that influence depends less on vocal strength and more on observation, memory, and the ability to anticipate needs. Quirky fringe stories claim that some eunuchs could identify a visiting dignitary simply by the rhythm of his footsteps across the courtyard, a skill historians debate but which illustrates the keen attentiveness encouraged among palace youth. Yet even in such structured environments, small shocks remind them of the ever-present risk. A misinterpreted glance or misplaced word could cost favor, while careful attention might earn trust or even protection. The palace is simultaneously a sanctuary and a trap, a place where the boys' identities are shaped but never entirely their own. The smallest victories, a joke that went unpunished, a task completed unnoticed, become quietly celebrated milestones. As the eunuchs grow into their roles, the understanding of power becomes increasingly complex. It is not the sultan's favor alone that matters, nor is it only the hierarchy of the harem. Influence emerges in the gray spaces between protocol and intuition. They learn to read gestures, interpret silence, and exploit gaps in attention. Life inside these walls teaches that even the smallest decisions, how to walk, how to speak, even when to laugh, carry weight. The palace becomes both classroom and battlefield, and each boy must decide how much he is willing to risk for recognition or survival. And just when the daily rhythm seems almost tolerable, the whispers of rivalry and danger begin. Alliances shift, promises are tested, and the eunuchs realize that the harem is not merely a cage, it is a theater where every move counts, and every eye is watching. The next phase of their lives, where subtle influence becomes high-stakes political navigation, is about to begin, and the stakes are higher than they have yet imagined. The palace now feels less like a building and more like a living organism, its heartbeat synchronized with every whispered secret, every hurried footstep on polished stone. Eunuchs, having endured the transformative castration and long months of rigorous training, now move through these halls as both participants and observers of a complex social ecosystem. Influence becomes currency and knowledge, the most dangerous form of power. Historians still argue whether the harem functioned primarily as a domestic space or as a central node of political intrigue. The boys, now young men, understand the blurred line intuitively. The day begins with a familiar routine, lessons, chores, observation, but the stakes have shifted. Now, subtle maneuvers carry real consequences. A slight misstep in protocol could attract the ire of a senior concubine or a high-ranking official, while a well-timed intervention could earn trust that secures protection and privileges. A quirky anecdote recounts a eunuch who memorized the exact order of the sultan's meals, not for culinary obsession, but to predict which rooms would be empty and thus safe for confidential conversations. Such attention to detail exemplifies the almost absurd demands of palace life. Psychological training intensifies. Eunuchs are taught not only to observe, but to anticipate behavior. They learn to interpret silence, measure hesitation, and detect unspoken hierarchies in every interaction. One fringe account claims that a particularly perceptive eunuch once deduced an impending coup simply by the rhythm of candlelighting in private chambers, a story historians debate, but which highlights the emphasis on acute sensory awareness. Humor persists as a survival mechanism. One boy quipped, "I've learned more from noticing a sultan's sneeze than from all my lessons combined," earning nervous laughter from peers who understood the underlying truth. As they assume more responsibility, eunuchs increasingly engage with the political machinery of the empire. Tasks expand from domestic duties to delicate negotiation, often acting as intermediaries between factions within the court. Their unique status, men without sexual threat, yet capable of trust, grants them access to spaces where influence is quietly consolidated. Fringe stories mention eunuchs attending secret council meetings disguised as messengers, yet historians argue whether such practices were common or romanticized over time. Regardless, the perception of power is as critical as power itself, and the boys learn to wield both with precision. The social web tightens. Alliances and rivalries deepen as eunuchs jockey for proximity to influence. Small victories, like correctly anticipating a request from a concubine or redirecting a potentially volatile conversation, become benchmarks of skill. Bonds forged in shared secrecy gain intensity, while betrayals can leave lifelong scars, both professional and personal. One diary fragment humorously recounts a senior eunuch hiding a pet turtle in a chamber to test the discretion of a junior, blending levity with a lesson in vigilance. Physical routines also carry psychological weight. Daily exercises, chores, and processions reinforce discipline while reminding eunuchs of their altered bodies and new roles. The paradox of being physically diminished but socially empowered creates tension, often expressed in subtle acts of humor, sarcasm, or coded conversations. They joke about their own invisibility, yet revel in the quiet authority it grants. Each day is a lesson in control, of self, of others, and of perception. But the palace is never static. Rumors circulate, alliances shift, and subtle power plays intensify. Eunuchs must navigate relationships with concubines, guards, officials, and even the sultan, each interaction a test of judgment, patience, and discretion. Mistakes, though minor to outsiders, can cascade into lost favor or dangerous scrutiny. The lessons of observation, learned over years, are now applied with urgent precision. And just as mastery begins to feel attainable, a new tension rises, a shift in court politics that threatens to unsettle the delicate equilibrium. Rumors of favoritism, impending intrigue, and hidden rivalries ripple through the palace. For the eunuchs, it is a reminder that even their careful calculations cannot entirely protect them. The stage is set for a confrontation where knowledge, cunning, and loyalty will be tested, and the consequences are far larger than a misread gesture or a misplaced joke. The palace now feels like a labyrinth of opportunity and peril, where every smile, glance, and word carries hidden meaning. Eunuchs, having mastered observation, timing, and subtle influence, face the ultimate test, navigating the ever-shifting tides of favor, suspicion, and ambition. Their lives, once marked by ritualized pain, are now defined by strategic decisions that could elevate or destroy them in moments. Historians still argue whether eunuchs held true political sway or merely acted as instruments of others' power. For the boys turned men inside the palace, the distinction often matters less than survival. Daily life has evolved into a delicate choreography of service and observation. Tasks range from mundane, ensuring proper arrangements for meals, arranging cushions, or monitoring guests, to the profoundly consequential, relaying messages, advising concubines on alliances, and quietly influencing the sultan's perceptions. Quirky accounts suggest that some eunuchs maintained private mental maps of the palace's secret passages and escape routes, a skill that proved useful during emergencies and palace intrigue. These tidbits, whether exaggerated or factual, underscore the duality of their existence, invisible yet omnipresent. The psychological burden is constant. Each interaction is a test of loyalty, discretion, and perceptive skill. The boys, now men, must measure responses, anticipate reactions, and interpret subtle cues. In a world where a single misstep could erase months of careful maneuvering, humor remains a vital coping mechanism. One senior eunuch joked, "I've learned more from a curt look than from all the lectures combined." A reminder that levity often masks a sharp, critical mind. Friendships are deeply layered, forged through shared secrets and mutual survival strategies. Bonds between eunuchs are fortified by the understanding that each possesses unique knowledge and access, but also by a shared history of pain and transformation. Rivalries simmer beneath polite interactions as ambition and influence constantly test alliances. One fringe story recounts a eunuch using a cleverly disguised musical instrument to send coded messages, a tale historians debate, but which illustrates the ingenuity demanded by palace life. As the years progress, eunuchs often rise to positions of significant influence. They negotiate delicate palace politics, broker quiet agreements, and serve as essential advisors to those seeking to manipulate the court's power dynamics. Their physical alteration, once a symbol of vulnerability, becomes a paradoxical shield, granting access denied to unaltered men while simultaneously demanding heightened awareness and cunning. The palace, a place of luxury and danger, rewards precision, patience, and subtle intelligence above all. Yet danger remains ever present. Factional disputes, jealousy, and political maneuvering can transform allies into threats overnight. The boys who once entered the palace as uncertain recruits now navigate a sophisticated web of loyalties, favors, and secrets. Fringe accounts suggest eunuchs sometimes manipulated outcomes subtly, steering decisions without the sultan's explicit knowledge, a claim historians continue to debate, reflecting the opacity of their historical footprint. The balance between trust and suspicion defines every action, and as the narrative of their lives unfolds, a new generation enters the palace, their innocence and fear mirroring the boys' own past. The cycle of transformation, observation, and subtle manipulation repeats, underscoring a chilling continuity. Power in the harem is less about brute force or birthright and more about mastery of perception and psychological agility. Eunuchs, survivors of trauma and artisans of influence, remain both invisible and indispensable, navigating a labyrinth where every choice carries weight. Even as the palace quiets at night, shadows of past betrayals and hidden ambitions linger, a reminder that survival and influence are never guaranteed. The boys turned men understand this well, their lives a delicate equilibrium of fear, strategy, and resilience. And just when a sense of control seems attainable, the next wave of intrigue surges, a subtle reminder that the true test of their skills is never complete, and the palace never stops watching. The palace corridors soften in the mind's eye as the echoes of intrigue slowly fade. Every footstep, every whispered conversation, every carefully measured glance that once dictated life within these walls now lingers only as a faint echo, barely brushing against the listener's awareness. The boys who entered the palace years ago, wide-eyed and uncertain, have become men who move with careful precision, knowing the weight of every gesture and the power of every silence. The grandeur of the palace, once overwhelming and electric with schemes, seems to exhale now, as if the walls themselves are slowing their rhythm to match the gentle ebb of the story. It is hard to imagine the long days they endured, the endless lessons in observation, prediction, and subtle influence. And yet, here in this slower moment, those skills feel almost like a melody, a quiet current running beneath the surface. The humor they found to survive, the small quirks, the clever tricks, the hidden jokes, now drifts like faint sparks in a darkened room, reminding us that even amid tension, there is room for levity. One recalls the tale of a eunuch who memorized the path of each candle in a hall to signal messages, a story debated by historians, but nonetheless a testament to ingenuity born of necessity. These playful notes lighten the memory of hardship, letting the listener exhale with each retold anecdote. The palace itself becomes almost tender in this imagined space. The walls that once echoed with power, suspicion, and whispers of betrayal now seem to breathe softly, as though the stones and silk are resting alongside the men who once navigated them so meticulously. The eunuch's footsteps, once cautious and measured for survival, now move through memory as though gliding, a soft rhythm that matches the listener's own slowing pulse. Every interaction, every alliance, every rivalry, they now hover in gentle suspension, no longer threatening, but still alive with meaning, like shadows in the corner of the room that promise stories without imposing fear. Friendships, too, emerge in a more serene light. Bonds formed in secrecy and necessity endure, but they are no longer tests of loyalty under threat. They are subtle, resilient threads connecting those who have lived through transformation. Each secret shared and each alliance forged now reads as a quiet testament to human ingenuity and adaptability, a reminder that intelligence and empathy can survive even the strictest walls. Humor, once a survival mechanism, lingers now as a delicate warmth, a soft glow against the backdrop of a life once defined by careful observation and delicate negotiation. The sounds of the palace, once a cacophony of ceremony, movement, and authority, fade to a gentle hum in the imagination. The flicker of candles, the rustle of silk, the faint clatter of dishes in distant chambers, all become lullabies of memory. The boys who endured castration and trauma, now grown and seasoned by palace life, exhale their tension in these quiet moments. The palace, ever alive in history, now feels like it is breathing with them, a slow rhythm of resilience and endurance that the listener can almost match with their own heartbeat. Odd little stories resurface in this calm: a turtle hidden in a garden to ward off bad luck, the musical tricks of clever eunuchs, the eccentricities that historians debate as either legend or truth. These moments, once crucial for amusement or subtle signaling, now feel like tiny flashes of light through long corridors, reminders of creativity and playfulness amidst the discipline and danger. Humor and ingenuity, even in shadowed corners, persist as threads of humanity. The listener may imagine evenings in the palace that are no longer frantic or tense. Candlelight flickers gently on stone and silk. Shadows stretch long but softly, and figures glide through quiet halls with measured grace. The knowledge and skills honed over years, the precision, the vigilance, the political awareness, now play as a gentle background rhythm rather than a pressing force. Insight and adaptability, once weapons of survival, now appear as subtle strengths, almost comforting in their presence. As the story drifts toward its close, the images linger, soft but vivid. The palace, the eunuchs, the lessons of endurance and intelligence, they remain present like a slowly fading melody. Each step they took, each decision made under pressure, and every quiet strategy practiced now exists in calm suspension, a testament to human resilience that the listener can carry forward. The palace, while still full of history and intrigue, becomes a sanctuary of memory, where the past can be admired without overwhelming the present. The final moments of this imagined world are almost tender. The corridors are quiet, the candles dim, and shadows stretch across walls that have seen centuries of ambition, loyalty, and subtle maneuvering. The eunuchs rest in chambers long ago claimed by time, their minds calm after decades of vigilance and care. Lessons of observation, patience, and subtle influence remain like soft embers, warm, gentle, and enduring. The palace exhales one last time, a slow breath shared with those who have journeyed alongside these figures. And as the listener's own surroundings grow still, as the world outside softens, a quiet thought lingers. History is full of these small hidden moments, echoes of human endurance and ingenuity. Even in worlds defined by power, secrecy, and challenge, there are glimmers of calm, moments where life slows and observation transforms into reflection. The story closes not with tension, but with a sense of soft comprehension, leaving the listener settled, thoughtful, and quietly amazed. Somewhere, far down the corridors of history, another palace waits. Another set of secrets, another rhythm of survival, and another journey into human endurance linger, ready to be discovered the next time curiosity drifts into the night. The story has ended for now, but the shadows of memory remain, offering warmth, reflection, and the quiet thrill of the past lingering beside the present.